Hello,
Hey,
I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and we are here to talk about Season 6A, Episode 3, Mayham.
Did you want me to complete your word?
Mayhem.
Him.
Ham.
No, so this is kind of like part 2 of our Kevin Finnerty series
Kind
episodes,
of. Yeah.
if you can call it that. So I definitely want to talk about that this episode.
For me, that's kind of the most
that's
memorable.
It. That's like, well, no, that's what I want to talk about.
That's it.
No, there's like some good, like I like the stuff with the mob that's going on in this episode too.
Yeah.
And I like the stuff with Silvio. But for me, like this episode, like a lot of like the big meanings from the show come out in this like there's in the Kevin Finnerty storyline, there's just like a lot.
Yeah.
That's really key, I think, to the
Well, it's also
to
introducing
the
the end game of the series, and I think it's really introducing these kind of fundamental themes of the show.
Totally.
For the last season. And
Totally.
it's kind of dealing with these bigger questions that are really important to the creators.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting episode because it's almost standalone in some ways. You have
Totally.
these kind of like little progressions to where characters stand, what their relationships are to others, but at the end it's not that important. And the Kevin Finnerty storyline, when you...
It kind of stands alone too, because we kind of like... Where he wakes up in this episode, I think is a different place even than he was before. I don't think that's the same hotel room. So you kind of do have this...
Well, it starts to break down a little bit, I find. The story, like, by the time we get to the very end, and he's approaching that moment with Polly in the room of being closer to death, there's this element of the realism of that world kind of ending. I mean, even the fact that he has this invitation to the Kevin Finnerty family reunion, I have to kind of wonder, like, well, how did he get that? If he's not Kevin Finnerty and he's just in his room, well, how does he have this invitation to Kevin Finnerty's family reunion? And even, he's talking, he says, well, what is that beacon? And he gets an answer. It becomes more dreamlike. It actually reminds me to the scene where he has a dream and he sees Carmine Bertazzi in bed, and he goes and picks up the phone, and it's actually David Chase talking to him. But it's like kind of breaking down the reality in that dream world. But now this isn't a dream world, but it's becoming less realistic than when it started.
Yeah.
So the thing for me is when I think of 6A, I always think of Kevin Finnerty. That's kind of the part that really stands out for me, and I really love. But it's amazing because in this 2-part kind of series in and of itself, these 2 episodes, it doesn't take up that much airtime. And in this episode, it might even be less. There's so much that's going on outside of that storyline.
I know. That's the thing.
There's
like,
actually so many like narrative developments
too, but
in this episode that are so real. And in the real world, like, they get money. They're dealing with the fallout of giving the money to Carmela. There's these power struggles. Silvio is dealing with being the boss.
Carmela's internal struggles. Yeah, the whole Silvio being a boss thing.
And yet all this is happening while this other realm exists for Tony. It's really interesting.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, do you want to go through some of the stuff from the Kevin Finnerty storyline then first? Then maybe we can jump into some of the other ones.
Let's do that. That sounds great.
I think for me, like, there's a couple things that really stood out for me in this storyline. And I think, like, it's some of the questions that are asked are really, really important, right? So, like, we see him go to this monastery, which, again, so he wakes up in this room that I don't think is the same room he went to sleep in. So, like, where is Kevin / Tony? Like, / Anthony, because I do think, like, that Anthony character is still a different character, too. Like, the American accent Tony Soprano.
Right.
Right. So I do feel like there are still these 3 characters. So, like, where is this person and who is this person now in this scene?
Right.
And then he goes, so then, like, to deal with this summons notice that he receives in his hotel room.
Right, by going to the monastery.
He goes to the monastery, and it's in kind of like a tropical area, which, is a little, I'm not sure what state's he supposed to be in? I forget.
Well, he's in Costa Mesa, I guess, which is in California.
Okay. So maybe it could be in California.
Could be,
okay, I wasn't really thinking about that. But anyways.
Yeah.
it's in this kind of like lush, weird environment. And he goes there and he says to them, I thought you could help me reach Finnerty. So for me, that's really important because when he gets this invitation to the Finnerty family reunion, which again, like you were saying, like I kind of equate that part of like him being really, really close to death, right? He's like going tachycardic after Polly's talking to him, right? And that's when he goes to this inn at the Oaks for the Finnerty family reunion. Like there is something about like reaching Kevin Finnerty, like finding Kevin Finnerty.
But also like finding infinity. Like there's that pun that's even referenced in the beginning of the last episode.
I think that like there's never really like a clear cut answer, but I keep trying to kind of think about like, so what does that mean for Tony Soprano, this concept of reaching infinity, if that's where like the Finnerty thing is coming from? Like what does that mean to Tony, and the fact that he like sees his own mother and stuff like that and his reactions, like what does that look like for our Tony Soprano? What does that look like for these other Tony Sopranos that are in the world too? So that was really important. And then like kind of I guess like prior to that, I guess we talked last episode about how at the Kevin Finnerty, we'll call him Kevin Finnerty,
full name,
when Kevin Finnerty like kind of chooses not to make the phone call to his family at the end of last episode, we were talking a little about that. In this episode we see he actually does call home. He doesn't like, he does reach out to these people. He doesn't tell them the whole truth about it, but he does say to them, like she says to him, what are you still doing out there? Right. And he kind of explains that it's this lawsuit that's holding him back. And I think like that's also kind of confusing to me because like when he's talking to the monks at that monastery, they're having this whole conversation about like someone needs to take responsibility, right? We're all the same as that tree. There's no
and actually that scene ends by saying we need to find someone who will take responsibility, and then Tony or Kevin says, well, I can't do that, and then they leave that scene. So I think that's really pretty key because at that moment...
that's what so we'll get like, hold on one second, because but like this is just like to keep it in my mind, like the fact that like that's what he's telling his family, like the reason why he can't come back, and it does seem like it's about this taking responsibility for something. Anyway, sorry, go and say what you were going to say.
It's very interesting because now Tony's in this situation where he's actually Sorry,
I don't know.
Tony.
Kevin. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
But he's saying specifically that he can't take responsibility, and I think that that's something that's constantly weighing on the real Tony Soprano. Yeah. Is that psychologically he's not taking responsibility for his role in his character, and that's something that we've been dealing with in psychology throughout the entire show, and that he's been going through with Melfi, where he doesn't take responsibility, and that's kind of a window into the fact that he cannot do that. And being in this realm, like whether it's California or not, the fact that it's in this Buddhist realm is interesting because it's kind of a world that's separate from the world that we've lived in. It's actually very far removed from the ideology of New Jersey and that mob.
Yeah, it's like completely.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of flirted with Buddhism at different points. Gloria Trillo was interested in it, and Tony was kind of drawn to her. There's been other references, but the ideas of Buddhism and the ideas of one day we will all die, then we will be the same as that tree, know me, know you, that's very far removed from the kind of day-to-day concerns and the kind of
like even just like vocabulary of the mob, right? Like that wouldn't even be like a way in which they would think.
No, the core tenets too of the philosophy are just so contradictory. So it's interesting to see him in that space, but he's unable to take responsibility for this issue. What I find interesting throughout this episode of the Kevin Finnerty storyline is like when he wakes up, we see him wearing this white shirt, white sheets, white pillow. It's like he's framed by white, and there's the use of color at other points, but I feel like he's kind of this blank slate at the beginning of this episode in some ways, and the question is, will he take responsibility for Kevin Finnerty? will he kind of become Kevin Finnerty? There's kind of this mystery that's kind of being solved that he's working through, and I think is very important to Tony Soprano psychologically. So even though he's near death, it's like it's an opportunity and maybe a catalyst for him dealing with some of these psychological issues that he's been dealing with the whole series. So I find that really interesting.
Well, and also like, you know, kind of coming to terms with he has never taken responsibility for anything that he's done, right? Up until like now. And even that kind of like, it wasn't, you know, wasn't like a direct result of his actions that he got shot by Junior, right? But like up until now, he's not paid consequences for things that he's done. And who is going to take responsibility, right? And so in this episode, we're also dealing with like, you know, Meadow and AJ, right? Like that they're becoming, you know, Carmela's talking to Melfi. She's saying they're more and more complicit, right? Yeah. Like, I think Tony is kind of like weighing this, like, so if I don't take responsibility for what I've done, or if I don't take responsibility even on behalf of this other person, Kevin Finnerty, like who's going to take responsibility for my life if it ends, right? Like if, you know, so
and it's an interesting
and the guy like, and so also with the guys like, you know, paying Carmela money and stuff like they're currently taking that responsibility, but like how long might that last, and like what are their motivations behind it?
And they're sad about
like,
it.
And what is and
they're
really,
upset.
That elevator scene is so good.
Also, I love this is an episode written by Matthew Weiner, and that's really interesting because he's the one who created Mad Men, and the elevator is actually used multiple times in this episode, which is kind of a precursor to Mad Men, because the elevator is such a potent symbol in that show. And we won't go into the symbolism of that show because you could do our whole podcast on it, but it's really interesting.
Maybe
like one of the maybe, but you know, even like in the very beginning, it's just really interesting to see a writer kind of formulating these ideas and seeing it come out early. But Polly finding the coke, there's this elevator ring that actually edits out of that scene, and then we see AJ and Meadow walking out. It really reminds me and brings me into the space of Mad Men, where he used these kind of sounds, innocuous objects kind of as symbols for these larger themes, which is why he was kind of such a perfect fit for this show. It's really interesting. But that last elevator scene is great because it gives us a window into how Vito, Polly, and Carmela feel, and also the understanding from Carmela of...
Well, Carmela suddenly like cluing in, being like, oh shit, like they're not happy to do this. Like this is not like this is not something that is like from the goodness of
I think she's one of the only characters who's like truly connected to Tony in the family. I mean, Meadow probably is. AJ is debatable. The rest of the mob family, I mean, it seems like
they don't even know how to be around him, really.
They don't want to be around him. They act in the wrong ways. Even at the end, you know, like they're excited when they say the skip's going to be okay, but they're mostly kind of strategizing about how it's going to benefit them the most, how they can get away with spending less money. I think it's interesting, though, because death and the potential for death in the show brings out an opportunity for reflection for characters that we've seen multiple times at this point. And I think Carmela is also going through some reflection and having to take responsibility. So this death is kind of a catalyst for characters asking themselves these deeper questions. So Carmela, I don't know if I loved him in spite of it or because of it. There's this kind of opportunity. There's this kind of moment of real reflection, and it's interesting because it kind of, this is when she's talking to Melfi in the therapy session, but you know, then she kind of rationalizes. So there's this kind of up and down. She's saying, there are bigger crooks than my husband. But then it leads to kind of this, now what? And it's kind of like what Finnerty is going through. Like Melfi points out, well, your kids are becoming more and more complicit. You can't shield them. They're growing up. You've made these decisions. Carmela is aware that she knew who Tony was, but her kids weren't. So this kind of web that she's caught in, and she's kind of making her way through that.
They don't choose who they're born to.
And she's deciding, too, how much responsibility she has in that, in these moments, which I think is really key for her. And it's similar maybe to what Tony is dealing with in this kind of netherworld.
Yeah.
And similarly, like, I feel like the other characters just don't care. You know, like Bobby has these material concerns.
He's like in a fucking panic this episode.
And, you know, and still is in a panic to the point where he's actually having his health compromised, and Bobby blocks in the EMT or whatever, the paramedic.
Has Bobby said he's going to do something drastic before? I feel like he has.
Maybe. Did he do something drastic?
No, but I feel like he's said that line before, and it always sounds really funny coming out of that character's mouth for me. Because even though I know he's like a bad guy,
right?
You know, who's like,
he has model trains. How bad can he be?
Well, I know, but he just always like sounds funny coming from his mouth. Anyways.
Yeah, I just feel like all the characters in the mob are just at every turn just kind of showing their cards and showing how much they don't really care about Tony and how their relationship with him is transactional.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really transactional. And I think the family, there's kind of this opportunity for the show to kind of show one of its other main messages at times, whereas that all this shit is so fucked up, but the family and these interpersonal connections are kind of all we have, and they do have more meaning and weight than a lot of the other things in this world and in life, because they do seem important. Even the last line of this episode, that's got to feel good, the simple things, and Karma's just kind of Q-tipping Tony's mouth. But that's like one of the only scenes of genuine empathy and caring that we have. And everything is so complicated and everybody's so psychologically burdened with these responsibilities. There's something just in that simple caring that is important. And when we're confronted with death and people have the risk of being taken away, I feel like those are kind of important moments where people actually have a connection to somebody and it means something. Because Tony's relationship with all the other people in his orbit doesn't really mean that much when he's about to be gone. He's kind of replaceable. Even Silvio saying that Jackie was floating the idea of it not being Tony.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Tony's relationship to everybody and his stature in this world
it's not important. Deep. It's not that deep.
No.
You know, like, it's, they're coworkers. I mean, really, they can say their family all they want.
Yeah.
But, I want to go back to the elevator thing.
Yeah.
Actually.
I like elevators.
I was just noticing, those of you who have seen the whole series, which I don't know how many of you.
So I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know who's watching it for the first time.
We know we have some first-time viewers.
But we know we have some also many-time viewers.
Many-time
viewers. Like, more, maybe even more than us.
Probably more than us.
But definitely more than us. But there was a lot of scenes in this episode that transitioned with like a bell or a beep, and like the elevator ding being one of those sound, like, you know, we hear the sound before we see the scene change.
Yeah.
And then we see the results of that sound. And that was happening a lot in this episode. And so it reminds me of the last episode where there's a very key bell that rings.
Yeah. And has been endlessly theorized about.
For me, I don't know, this episode, and like maybe we can go into that a little bit more too, because like there is the beacon, right? And this white light that you know he sees earlier in the episode when they're like flashing light over his eyes, you know, and then we see this like big flash later on when he actually like.
We also see it actually like when he gets the Finnerty family reunion card, he's looking at it, and then it flashes to light, and it also flashes to light when he comes
I think
back
there's
to
like
the
some
world. There's a lot of lights at key moments.
You know, so and there is in the final episode also, but definitely in this episode we see these sounds, or these, I don't know, like again, I think like for me the sounds and the flashes of light kind of go together. They're these markers that we have between these scenes. I just feel like they are these kind of they demarcate these moments that are going on. And we were talking about the like concept of having like a meditation bell, right? So it kind of like keys you in at these important moments and makes you pay attention.
Right.
Also, it is just like, it's kind of like seeing these vignettes and kind of not having a good grasp of how time has passed in this episode, right?
Right.
Like there is one funny transition actually where Carmela comes in to his hospital room and says good morning to him. And then it goes into the Kevin Finnerty world and he's at the Cosa Nostra bar.
Yeah.
And it's nighttime.
Right.
Outside. Well, you can see the beacons in the background. Right. It's nighttime. So yeah, it's just like vague understanding of time, but it does, I don't know, it does kind of call your attention. And we did see a lot of clocks in this episode too. Like
you do see a lot of clocks. You do see reference to the specific time quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting too. I was wondering if it was even worth like commenting on. You do see the time a lot. It does kind of like hug around the 3 mark a lot, which makes me wonder because like earlier in the show, Christopher references this 3 a.m. when he goes to hell and he dies. It could just kind of be connective tissue. It could be coincidence entirely.
It could be just bait.
But yeah, it could just be bait, which is interesting. I mean, there's all these theories too about 3 and that referring to the final episode.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the like solving of a puzzle is just more and more as I watch the show, just not the point. So
yeah,
I think it's easy to get hung up on little details like that. But
totally.
There is a lot of reference to time. I mean, even to the point where when Tony does come back into the world, we actually see the time. And there's been a progression of seeing the clock through previous scenes leading up to that we have an idea of how long everything has taken, which is interesting because time has been elusive. But we actually see it kind of, I believe, crossing the threshold of 3 from about like 2:30 to 3:30 in multiple scenes of when Polly's there, when he's waking up, the medical operations. It's interesting because they make that decision to let us know.
Yeah, totally. And that's always like, I mean, you can't help but pay attention to something. Like, they made a choice to put a clock in those shots.
Of course.
You know, like, it wasn't just like, oh, there's this clock here, you know? Like,
right.
So it definitely is meant to call our attention to it, I think. I do love that scene, actually, when he's at the bar in Cosa Mesa with the bartender.
Right.
Because it's kind of reminds...
I am Kevin Finnerty?
Yeah.
No, that's too weird.
Yeah, I mean, and he's actually talking about some other, let me just find my note from there.
Well, actually, that scene I found fascinating because there's something I noticed this time where he says, my uncle has memory loss, which so definitely ties him to the to the real Tony Soprano.
Which we don't really see. We don't see ever.
Right. It's really interesting because he's saying, am I Kevin Finnerty? Well, he actually just gave some proof that he's the real Tony Soprano by saying that.
Right. Yeah.
So I found that really interesting. I liked that.
No, I liked that too. And I was like that. It also was very much like how he would talk to Melfi, right? Like he was kind of asking him, he was telling him these like things that have gone on, like about his uncle who has memory loss, right?
Yeah.
You know, asking like, is it possible that I could be Kevin Finnerty? And the bartender's kind of just like, great, dude. Like he's like not paying attention to him at all.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting then that we like do encounter Melfi also in this episode, right? To kind of like, I think like going back to like with the Buddhist stuff and everything like that, I think like there is something really deep at our Tony's core that is interested in those kind of beliefs, right? Like there is a reason why Tony is drawn to therapy.
Right.
I feel like Melfi's brought up Buddhism.
She has, I think, yeah.
I wish I kind of had tracked that a little.
Trillo.
Yeah. But that there is this part of Tony, right? This like one of his multiple kind of identities, I guess, who is really concerned with these larger issues and
yet he largely represses them.
Totally. But
I think that's
if
the
he
point
comes to any understanding,
death,
he gets scared and turns back and goes back to who he, you know, is at his core. He like doesn't want to progress really, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's like kind of spot on. Like when you get close to death, which he gets closer and closer to death in this episode, I think as it goes on, maybe you do start to like delve more into those kind of
uncover those things.
Yeah. So some things I wanted to talk about a little bit further. I don't know what kind of order you want to talk about them in, but I want to talk more about trees. I want to talk more about, like, we have these two kind of key monologues from, well, actually I think we have more than 2 monologues. Let me put it that way. But the ones that were standing out to me were Carmela's when she's talking with Tony, talking with Melfi, and Polly's when he's talking to Tony. Because Carmela's when she's talking to Melfi is, I think, like some of the deep, like, I think it's almost like as deep as we get with Carmela in some ways.
Agree.
Like, I don't know if we ever kind of reach deeper into Carmela than we do in that scene.
I agree.
Or like understand
She's
her
very
better.
honest.
Because like even her saying like she, you know, she knew what was behind everything. She went to her priest and that was bullshit.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting because we only kind of have the opportunity to reach that depth with Carmela when she's kind of a surrogate for Tony as the main character. I mean, we probably wouldn't have the space be it in Showtime or even just the way that this show is constructed, being around Tony Soprano, to reach that kind of psychological realization or honesty or statement from Carmela at any other time.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's like I don't know, like, I don't know, it's like a product, what that's a product of, right? Like, is that a product of just like how they want to tell Carmela's story? Because I do think it is in these moments where Carmela doesn't have Tony to rely on that are the times where she becomes the most kind of bold and honest, I think. When he's there and it's like business as usual, it's a lot harder for her to get that deep with herself. Like, it's like too present or something like that for her. So yeah, it is interesting. We talked about, that was the whole, the kids being complicit and not choosing who they were born to. These are really like deep existential issues, right? Like about, again, like the deepest we go with Carmela on like parenting, kind of how she views that and stuff like that also. Yeah, I don't know.
Totally.
But then we have Polly's monologue, which is all about himself, right? And it's in the like, and the rest of them apparently have all been just speaking positively to Tony, right?
Theoretically.
Like, that's theoretically. I mean, that's
what they're supposed to do.
We know that AJ was talking about
Polly's first thing was, he looks terrible.
Yeah. It's a great, it's both scenes, like when Syl comes to see Tony and when Polly comes to see Tony, they're both great scenes. But, he's talking about himself. He's talking about how he sees himself. Yeah.
Being at the urologist.
Yeah. But he's kind of like, revealing a lot about himself.
It's true. It actually does become pretty deep. He actually, I think, makes the statement, do I blame myself for this life? Which is pretty unbelievable. Yeah, so again, this kind of confrontation with death being kind of a catalyst for people asking these deeper questions. And what's interesting is that during this whole monologue, Tony's heart rate raises, and I kind of feel like he needs empathy in those moments, and he can't deal with other people being self-absorbed because he's gonna die. And in those moments, these characters are incapable of doing that, and it's leading to him coming closer to death. It's all he needs is kind of like at the end, those simple things, and he can't get it from anybody around him.
Well, and it was making me think, like, why is it that comes through to Tony? Because like we were saying last episode, like, they're playing music for him. We jumped to a scene with Kevin Finnerty, and he doesn't hear the music, right? So we weren't seeing anything really cross over. This episode, we do start to see we kind of see some light that goes between both worlds, right? Like they're flashing light in his eyes in the real world, and then it's also in his dream state. But Polly's the first kind of like voice. I mean, it just sounded like muffled noise from another room, but like that's like the first voice that kind of got through to him. Yeah. Also, right? I mean, later, is that voice when he's at the Inn at the Oaks? That's the child's voice calling him. Is that Meadows' voice?
Maybe. Probably.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like if I'm certain about that or not, because I have trouble kind of reconciling that would be the thing that would bring Tony back. I struggle with actually kind of finding it believable.
Yeah, maybe, but I think it's more Tony doesn't want to go into that house because he doesn't want to drop his suitcase. He's distracted by the voice. It maybe raises his concern about where he is and what's going on. Yeah. But I think ultimately he doesn't want to leave his baggage. And that's what the Tony Blundetto, not Tony Blundetto man character
I'm glad we got to see him.
Me too. But that's kind of what he's saying to him. He's like, you can't take that in here. And that actually seems to be what concerns Tony. And also that he's scared. Yeah. He says, I'm scared.
Yeah.
And so I think that voice maybe brings his attention to something is wrong, and this isn't maybe what it seems, and this is a bigger decision than it could be being made out to be. It's not just going in and saying hi. But
I think it also goes back to like the baggage being the responsibility kind of, right? Because it's the fact like he's like I lost my bag, but I have Kevin Finnerty's, right? Like And so it's like this like needing to hold on to something, like who are you, right? Like, or like, who am I and why am I here? Whatever the question was last episode. What was that question?
Our religion or sin, death, and disease, really?
No.
That was one of them. And then there was a cross. Who am I? Who are we? Join the club.
Yeah. Oh, who am I? Where am I going?
Right.
Yeah.
Good questions.
I knew I kind of had it, but like that he's, you know, we constantly deal with these multiple parts of Tony's identity, right? We have like Tony as the mob boss. We have Tony as a father, as a husband, you know, as this guy who goes to therapy, as this guy who has like multiple other romantic partners, right? Mm-hmm. Like we see him hold a lot of different identities. Mm-hmm. And so giving up this bag, even if it's not yours, right? Like it's something, right? Because if not, then it's
and maybe it's easier to take responsibility for something that's not your own too, because Tony's incapable of that.
Yeah. I mean,
although at the beginning of the episode, it's Tony saying, "Well, I can't do that. Take responsibility for this thing that the monks need somebody to take responsibility for." So it's complicated.
Yeah. But yeah, like without an identity, like then it goes back to like we're all the same as that tree. There's no me, there's no you.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's David Chase's idea of like what the afterlife is. Like there's nothing there. There's
nothingness.
Just nothing.
Big nothing.
Just all a big nothing.
It's interesting how it's depicted too in On the Oaks, because for those who have seen the show before, I've always felt that there's a relationship between that that building and a building that's depicted on the mural in the last scene at Holston's. I kind of wondered if it was kind of simulated on that mural, which the team built for that scene. So again, talking about nothing is coincidental, everything is decided. There is kind of a
it's also like in some ways it's similar in ways to the house that Tony goes to in Calling All Cars. In his dream in that
where
one.
Lydia's walking down the stairs.
We have it's like kind of like that elevated porch, kind of like we have the same kind of viewpoint.
And even actually the house where he kills Tony Blundetto on the porch. There's a relationship kind of between all these places. They're all very similar. Yeah. Which is interesting because these
kind of like farm homes. Like they're like not,
It's interesting that they're important places in Tony's life where important events happen and then they become important environments in his subconscious, where he wrestles with these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The trees blowing in the wind, I think, are another very strong indicator of the kind of relationship to the afterlife that we've been talking about all the way back to season 1. So they're just kind of staying strong with those symbols there.
Yeah, I think it is like eternity or infinity or whatever. Like it's kind of Kevin Finnerty.
To Finnerty and beyond.
Like these trees... like it's like I don't know. It's like they're bigger than the rest of the characters, and they just
nature
keep, they just keep moving. They just keep kind of like whispering and moving, and
it's something. Well, and that's I almost forget because season 1 seems like so long ago, but we talked a lot about nature and trees and greenery and wind and these kind of natural elements,
forces,
but there is something that's more timeless and above the responsibility of humans that comes from that realm. And it's interesting to see Tony move from that realm to the world, and it's kind of imperfect, and he comes back into the realm and space where all these people have all these imperfect issues that they're kind of trying to deal with all the other characters that we know in imperfect ways, with imperfect outcomes, leading to Syl basically falling apart, unable to deal with these things. That's the world that Tony somewhat chooses to come back to, or ends up coming back to. It's very different than that natural, supernatural world.
You know, it isn't clear for sure that he chooses not to go into the house.
It's true. I was thinking that.
Because he says they're all waiting for you, and they were, and his family.
And he actually looks in to see the light.
And he says, "Your family's all waiting for you." Tony's like, "Whose family?" Right? But it's true. Like his family was all there waiting for him. I think he doesn't choose to go in there personally.
That's always it's interesting because they kind of imply it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
And actually, he is really kind of like peering in, and then the light's getting brighter.
Yeah. That's the thing too,
That's
right?
the thing.
Like in that place, like the house was all bright on the inside, and then we get this whiteness and this light. And that's the thing, like that's why the voice, like the child's voice, to go back to I guess where I started this tangent, but the child, like I just don't really believe that child's voice, that Meadows' voice. Like I don't know, I can more see the motivation behind him going into the house than I can him turning back. It's hard. It's just harder for me to like figure out why he would do that.
Interesting.
Like what it was actually that was calling him back. I can't quite figure it out. That's just me.
I think it's a fear actually of letting go of. I think it's out of fear.
Yeah, I don't. Actually. Yeah, I think it's. I think it's more out of fear of going to that place than it is that something in particular is calling him back.
And maybe in some ways, like if that suitcase represents his responsibilities, even if he's shirked from taking responsibility for his actions his whole life, he's not ready to abandon them
and put them onto his kids.
Depart from them and leave that world and just move on. I don't know if he's ready for that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
So it's interesting.
You need to let go.
Yeah, he's not ready for that. That's a Steve Buscemi quote.
Yeah. Yeah. As you know, Steve Buscemi always says.
As he's always saying that.
Yeah, you need to let go.
You need to let go.
Yeah.
Steve Buscemi.
We also have, I'm going to jump really just far right now. We also have the introduction of the best film within a film.
Cleaver. Love it.
Yeah. Ever. And I forget that we actually like get the full synopsis in this episode for some reason. I feel like we get it a little later.
Actually, that's another monologue. It's Chris's monologue.
It's another. Well, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, I knew there was another one, and I was trying to take note of them. Yeah, Chris has this monologue of the whole story of Cleaver, right?
Yeah.
And so we see, like, which is like it's interesting that whole thing is happening in this episode as well, because I think it's kind of like, one way in which people deal with these like questions, like life questions, is through art, and I think like having Christopher try and like deal with clearly lots of things that have gone wrong for him in his life, and put them into this film. We see how closely, like we can see his, we can like psychoanalyze the writing of the script, pretty easily, right? Like why Chris would have these ideas in his head. But this is the way that he's kind of dealing with it. It's actually another part of this episode that it's funny. Like, I don't really buy that Chris could actually, like, I just don't see anyone being like, yeah, like, your mob stuff, like, put it on the back burner for a bit and, like, make a movie. Like, I don't see anyone really, like, they have all the investors, quote unquote, there. That scene's a little surreal for me also. It's also
I guess it
funny.
wouldn't have happened if Tony was...
I guess.
Around.
I mean, that's the reason. Is that what it's like?
Well, yeah, I mean,
implying?
I think he's doing it because Tony's not there. But then how does he go
forward and make the movie?
We'll have to see. We can talk about that in future episodes. But, I mean, no, I think Christopher, he's being very opportunistic. I mean, the fact that he even brings this up and he's talking to Tony when he's a vegetable.
And then he says, all due respect.
All due respect.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it just shows, I think he would be afraid to confront Tony on that issue because he knows that he wouldn't support it.
Yeah.
He hasn't supported it in the past. Why would he support it now?
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. I mean,
I think Cleaver sounds like a great... Well, I like it better than Pork Store
Killer.
Pork Store Killer, yeah.
Good job, JT. Yeah. I loved, actually, the way... There was some really interesting kind of direction and camera work when they showed JT. He's up high in this building. There's a lot of moving cameras. It's very kind of dramatic.
He's even, like, up high on a stool, kind of.
Above the city, up high on a stool. It's this kind of, like... elevated stature, this kind of...
Yeah, he seems like he's doing okay.
And he's also talking about concepts in a more kind of...
like haughty kind of...
esoteric way. And it's interesting because he's actually brought down from this tall building into the car. And the way the camera work changes, it's not moving around. Now we see Chris kind of dominating the frame, pointing into it, yelling into it, lower angle, kind of making Chris look more imposing, pointing right at us. There's this kind of menacing nature that also kind of reflects the film ideas that he has and his identity as a writer.
Yeah.
which is bad. But but we see kind of a contrast in the way the two writers are depicted, which is great. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I like that too. I mean, welcome back, JT Dolan.
Hey JT, how's it going?
Sorry that you have to still be involved with these guys.
Yeah, it's really too bad. He seems to...
But yeah, then we do have Chris, in with Tony at the end of the, right as Tony's near the end of the episode.
Yeah.
After Tony's woken up. And that's kind of the shift in him in that monologue from the beginning to the end is really great, right? Mm-hmm. When he's like, actually, all due respect, I think you owe this to me, right? Because of Adriana. And we can see that this is something that still impacts him. He still is mad, I guess, about Tony being in the car with Adriana that time when they had the car accident. What episode was that in?
Irregular Around the Margins.
Irregular Around the Margins, yeah.
Ooh, putting me on the spot.
I knew you had it. And because he says the boss is sleeping with the fiance, right? And so he still has this kind of hang up about that. But then we also see that his hang up that he's like, you owe this to me because I told you about Adriana, right? That this was something there was not a fair exchange in that interaction, right? So it goes back to kind of that being transactional thing.
Fascinating too, because I mean the narcissism to kind of think that this is something that these guys have something due to them.
Yeah.
In that transaction.
In a transaction of killing someone.
Killing Adriana, a human being, is
who is your partner. Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else have you got? I think I have some little things.
There's some kind of minor windows into different characters. I mean, we've talked about Vito and Polly now, but there's
Well, I was also going to say, similar to Bobby, whenever I think about Vito, outside of, in my spare time when I'm thinking about Vito.
Yeah, when you're just chilling
and being Vito. What's he all about? I also have this weird Vito is this positive character without giving any spoilers, because of how his story...
you reflect on Vito when the show is over.
Yeah. His story arc ends in a way in this show that kind of leaves you looking back and being oh, he was a good guy.
Yeah.
And he's fucking not. He's terrible.
He's terrible.
He's so awful.
The way that he pays for the coffee. The way that he pays for the coffee for Carmela to kind of get out. It's brutal.
I need to remember that more when I'm thinking about Vito.
That happens a lot. You're always telling me how you're thinking about Vito.
Just thinking about Vito right now. Yeah, sorry. You were going to talk about something.
Just Vito. I was just thinking about Vito.
Also that Vito and Phil Leotardo are cousins.
Right.
That part's a little funny for me. It's little okay. Again,
they need it for later on.
No, but again, it's one of those things that's kind of the surreal aspect of some things getting into our actual episode. There are things that happen in this series that are you're really?
Maybe they just needed some help too in tying everything together and making it a little more organized.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
He also gives. Speaking of Vito, I have a lot to say about Vito, I guess.
Wow. Vito, you're always thinking about
that. Sorry. He also gives Finn that really weird / intimidating squeeze on the arm. Poor Finn. And Meadow's just he's harmless. Meadow does not give him any sympathy on that. He's being traumatized by Vito. That's scary.
It's really scary.
He didn't want to see him giving a guy a BJ. He didn't set out to see that. It wasn't his fault, No. And now he just has a creepy Vito.
He was just partying on the beach and wanted to sleep on a construction site.
It's really creepy.
It's not good.
It's not good.
We have kind of the evolution of Syl as a leader in this episode. I mean, these scenes of him talking to Gabriella, him looking at himself in the mirror.
We have that long scene of him on the toilet.
Right. The question, I guess, is kind of how does he see himself? And it becomes clear that he doesn't see himself as occupying that space.
No. Yeah, he doesn't have the, I don't know if it's confidence or
or the interest, or
the
composure, to the personality to deal with all these issues,
or to to take responsibility for issues, right? I think that's the thing we see here, going back to taking responsibility,
definitely.
He's in a panic when he has to make these calls between the guys, right? He doesn't want to be the one who gets the backlash for that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come down to him.
Yeah.
In other circumstances, it comes to Tony.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely. It's interesting because they flesh out. Flesh.
It's like fleshing out. You're adding when you're sculpting something. You're
right.
Oh,
okay, cool. That's what he's doing. So they kind of do that to him as a character.
Yeah.
Which they haven't had that much.
It's you put skin on the skeleton.
Flesh.
You flesh it out. You make it real.
Well, Silvio gets fleshed out, which is good.
Yeah.
Because we haven't had that much of a window into
we don't know him, really. Yeah.
And that's what happens, I guess, when Tony is gone. We have an opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Barbara is there.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I love this. I love the show so much. Obviously.
Do you? Do we?
Yeah.
Do you like it?
I love that Barbara is just always kind of in the background.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great.
There's this third soprano, and even Janice is pretty we don't get too much more insight into Janice these days.
No, not at this point in the show.
But Barbara, we just don't get anything from her ever.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's amazing.
We don't know anything.
Well, because she separated herself
and,
from this orbit, so
yeah,
it's just not really something that's going to happen. I like how Paulie and Vito, how quickly they turn on Carmela out of self-interest. It's crazy. Especially Paulie with the amount of history that he has with Tony and Johnny. It's pretty wild. Him saying "fuck her, princess of Little Italy."
Mm-hmm.
The characters are really not concerned with the well-being of the Soprano family at all. They do not care.
And even though they say it, right? He's well, I would want someone to do the same for his mother. And, Vito says about his wife, whatever his wife's name is.
Right.
They would want that for themselves, but they can't do that for
right.
other people.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And so it is. It's this, it's this, everyone's in the position where it's they want to be able to just take and never have to give.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah. I'm not going to get...
Also, just to go back to Vito.
Yeah.
There's a scene of him angrily eating carrots because he's on a diet.
Carrots.
Baby carrots.
Baby carrots.
Yeah.
Baby
Sorry,
carrots.
I was just thinking about Vito.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Now I'm just thinking about baby carrots.
Yeah.
Without getting too much into it, I did notice an interesting use of color in the hospital that kind of linked things back to the early seasons. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that I have kind of a grand theory for right now, but just kind of remarking on them. First of all, going back to the very first episode, the pilot, there's kind of an attempt to create these blue and black environments related to healthcare, which I think really is actually kind of dealt with in the first episode, and we've talked about a lot in the first season, in particular with Jackie being in a hospital environment. The hospital, again, is a very, very blue kind of world.
Yeah, everyone wears blue. And,
There were some interesting decisions that they had. Carmela kind of shifts what she's wearing throughout the episode. It does actually kind of evolve into incorporating more blues, but she actually wears these kind of strident yellows. We see Meadow also covered in green quite often, and they're very strong statements of color in an area where Carmela is yellow, Area is blue, Meadow is covered by green, which is interesting because obviously blue and yellow makes green. There's something there. I don't know if I want to get into theories of what everything means, because again, like I was saying earlier, it's a bit of a a pitfall that can exist with this show, because I think you can just kind of stretch too far, and it's interesting, and I've definitely been guilty of doing beautiful. It's but at the same time, I don't know if I feel confident enough in any reading of that to come up with something other than the relationship of that health caring environment to the beginning of the show and what that brings out of characters. So the kind of caring environment where somebody requires care and requires attention, both in a kind of immediate physical sense, but also in an emotional sense, is interesting in terms of what it brings out of the characters around them and how we get insight into the characters themselves.
Yeah.
And so at this point, it kind of relates Tony to Jackie for me.
Yeah.
I mean, even the fact that still brings that up, there's kind of a relationship
Yeah.
between those two times of the show.
Yeah.
It's just something I was thinking about.
Yeah. I just have to say that when we were watching the episode, we were commenting on the colors.
You were thinking about Vito?
No, but we commented on the colors, and then you said, I don't care about that. and
I'm over it.
And I know that you do, in fact, care very much about the colors in this show.
Mm. Yeah, but I'm over it right now. Don't care. Done.
I think we should go back and revise all our previous episodes and take out all your talk about color then.
Well, I had a lot to work through. Yeah, but it's there. It's all there.
Yeah.
It's all there. Give us your theories. Email us. We love hearing from you.
Yeah.
We're back now in part because people emailed us and then we felt bad.
Yeah.
Because some people thought we weren't okay.
It's also, I think, like, at least there is a part of it for me where it's like, we're almost done.
Yeah.
And I kind of, like, don't want to finish doing it. But I do, but I don't. It's a weird feeling. So.
Right. Well.
But it's summer, so.
It's summer.
It's fun. It's fun to do them.
It's fun.
Well, we still can.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. And if you enjoy the podcast, you can always rate it on iTunes. Helps people find it. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And send us an email. Our email is in the description. And we'll be back soon. We're going to keep on going through season 6. See you then.
No, you won't
Bye.
see them.
Oh, right. I won't see you then.
Yeah.
Unless you find us in New York and then we can hang out.
That would be weird. Okay.
Probably.
Or cool.
Or cool.
All right.
But weird too. Okay. Bye.